A group of sneaky bandits stole a massive amount of cash from a security company. A sci-fi writer turned self-help guru sailed into uncharted waters with his new book. And Mother Nature unleashed a whopper of a storm, causing chaos across the eastern United States. All this and more as we take a look at what happened in 1950, flashback of life in America. On January 17, 1950, a group of masked men pulled off a daring heist in Boston, Massachusetts. They broke into a building where Brinks, a security company, kept a lot of money. They tied up the workers and took more than $2.7 million in cash and checks, which is like $33.8 million today. It was the biggest robbery in the history of the United States at the time. The robbers were caught 6 years later, only a few days before the crime would have been too old to be prosecuted by law. As punishment, 8 members of the gang received a maximum sentence of life in prison. On January 31, 1950, President Truman announced that the United States would pursue the development of the hydrogen bomb. This decision was motivated by the Soviet Union's successful test of an atomic bomb in 1949. Known as the H-bomb, it relied on the fusion of hydrogen atoms, rather than the fission of uranium or plutonium atoms. The first test of the H-bomb was at a small island in the Pacific, and produced an explosion 1,000 times stronger than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The Soviet Union followed up with its own H-bomb test on November 22, 1955, sparking a nuclear arms race. The bomb was initially opposed by some scientists, such as Albert Einstein and Robert Oppenheimer, who feared its ethical implications. Disney's Cinderella, an animated film based on a fairy tale by Charles Perrault, opened in theaters across the U.S. on February 15, 1950. The movie was a critical and commercial success, earning $4.28 million at the box office and 3 Academy Award nominations. Cinderella was chosen for its thematic similarities to their earlier success, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Cinderella was the first full-length animated film produced by Disney since Bambi in 1942, as the studio had faced financial difficulties during the Second World War. It helped the studio avoid bankruptcy and enabled Walt Disney to fund other projects, such as Disneyland. The film featured memorable characters, such as the fairy godmother, as well as catchy songs like Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo. L. Ron Hubbard was a writer who wrote many stories in different genres, such as science fiction and fantasy. On May 9, 1950, he published a book called Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health. In this book, he explained his ideas about how the mind works and how people can improve their mental and physical health by getting rid of bad memories. He called this process auditing, and he claimed that it could help people become clear and reach their full potential. Many people were interested in his book and his method, and they formed groups to practice Dianetics. Hubbard was also a sailor and an explorer, and he traveled around the world several times. Later, Hubbard developed his ideas further and created a new religion called Scientology. On June 27, 1950, President Harry Truman ordered U.S. forces to South Korea to help the democratic government resist an invasion by communist North Korea. He made this decision without seeking congressional approval, claiming that he was acting as commander-in-chief to enforce a United Nations resolution. Truman's intervention marked the beginning of the Korean War, a 3-year conflict that resulted in millions of casualties and a stalemate along the 38th parallel. The war also had significant geopolitical consequences and set the stage for the Cold War in Asia. Truman later regretted not asking Congress for a formal declaration of war, as he faced criticism and lawsuits for overstepping his authority. On June 29, 1950, the U.S. soccer team shocked the world by defeating England 1-0 in the World Cup. England was considered one of the best teams in the world, while the U.S. was made up of mostly amateur players. The only goal of the game was scored by Joe Gachins, a Haitian immigrant who worked as a dishwasher in New York. The U.S. team played with courage and determination, despite being outmatched by the English in skill and experience. Dent McSkimming of the St. Louis Dispatch stated, "It was as if Oxford University sent a baseball team over here and it beat the Yankees." The victory is still regarded as one of the greatest upsets in soccer history. On September 7, 1950, the game show Truth or Consequences made its television debut on CBS after being a successful radio show since 1940. The show was created and hosted by Ralph Edwards, who later produced This Is Your Life. The show challenged contestants to answer trivia questions that were usually impossible or absurd, and then face humorous consequences if they failed. It also featured emotional surprises for some contestants, such as reuniting them with long-lost relatives. The series ran on various networks and in syndication until 1988, with hosts such as Bob Barker and Larry Anderson. A small town in New Mexico changed its name from Hot Springs to Truth or Consequences in 1950, after Edwards announced a contest to do so on the air. On October 2, 1950, the comic strip Peanuts by Charles M. Schulz made its debut in 7 newspapers across the U.S. The comic featured a group of children led by the lovable but unlucky Charlie Brown and their adventures with a beagle named Snoopy. The comic strip became an instant success and soon became one of the most popular and influential in the history of the medium. Peanuts tackled themes such as love, social anxiety, and the complexity of life with humor and resilience. The character of the little red-haired girl, who was Charlie Brown's crush, was based on a real woman who rejected Schulz's marriage proposal. The comic strip ran for almost 50 years until Schulz's retirement in 1999. On October 7, 1950, the New York Yankees defeated the Philadelphia Phillies by 5-2 in Game 4 of the World Series, winning their 13th championship. The Yankees were led by outfielder Joe DiMaggio, who hit a home run and a double, and pitcher Whitey Ford, who threw a complete game and struck out 7 batters. The Phillies, also known as the Whiz Kids, were making their first World Series appearance since 1915. However, they were no match for the Yankees, who outscored them 11-5 in the series and held them to a .203 batting average. The 1950 World Series was the last one to not feature any American-born black players until 2022. This was also the final World Series to have its television coverage shared among several TV networks. On November 25, 1950, a massive storm system struck the eastern U.S., causing widespread death and destruction. Known as the Storm of the Century, or the Appalachian Storm, it brought record-breaking snowfall, wind gusts, and low temperatures to many states. The storm affected about 22 million people and killed 353, mostly from traffic accidents, exposure, and heart attacks. It also disrupted transportation, communication, and power supply for several days. The storm was unusual because it featured both extreme cold and warm weather, depending on the location. The storm was the first one to be forecasted using numerical weather prediction, a technique that is still used today. If you enjoyed reminiscing about the 1950s, be sure to click on this video right here to watch more American Rewind.